Go.
Welcome to the Big Show College Football Playoff Preview presented by the Sportscast. Today's date is December 29th, 2021. If you haven't yet, please subscribe in all your channels, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch.tv, and Apple Podcasts. If you are on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. It does help us out tremendously. And visit us on the sportscast.net. You can also follow us on Twitter at the Sportscast1 and check out our app, the Sportscast, in the iOS App Store. The panelists joining me tonight, starting with Christopher Carvello, writer for West Coast College Football and co-host of the Southern Gentleman Sports Show on the Ticket 8:50 a.m. in Pensacola, Florida. Byron Jones, former defensive tackle who played for Tulsa and the Minnesota Vikings, and the co-host of the Jersey Shore Boys Sports Talk and the Sportscast contributor, and Tyler Turner, former defensive lineman for the Liberty Flames, Sportscast, Pac-12, and Big Ten contributor. Gentlemen, really exciting night to be with you all. Excited to kind of cover some of these college football games that we're going to be reviewing. So a quick agenda for tonight. We're going to be going over an Alabama-Cincinnati preview, obviously, a Georgia-Michigan preview. We're going to talk about some predictions, some talent evaluations, some key matchups, and then at the end, give some score predictions. But jumping right into it, let's start off with the Alabama-Cincinnati game. This is the number 1 seeded Alabama 12-1 Crimson Tide versus the number 4 seed 13-0 Cincinnati Bearcats and Arlington, Texas, in Jerry World, kicking off at 3:30 Eastern time. Starting with you, Chris, just want to kind of get your initial feelings about this game and kind of go from there.
Sure. This is obviously the group of 5. They finally have their shot. I think that this is the most deserving of those really good group of 5 teams that we've seen over the last decade or so. Better than the undefeated UCF, all those good Boise State teams, TCU. This is the best one out of that bunch. And here they are. They finally are going to get their shot. Unfortunately for them, I think things would look a little different as far as like how I would look at their chances in this game. If it wasn't against Alabama, I'm sure they were just groaning when, the Auburn running back stayed in bounds and Crimson Tide found a way to rebound and come back in that game against Auburn, which they looked terrible for 3 quarters of it, right up until the end. But laser focused, they blew out Georgia in the SEC title game. And I think that's going to carry on into this game against Cincinnati. And it's not going to be close, but, hats off to the Bearcats. I don't think that they're just happy to get there. I think they're going to have a good showing, but in the end, Alabama, if they play like they did against Georgia, man, they could overwhelm them quick.
Yeah, that's a great point. And going over to you, Ty, obviously this Alabama team has been inconsistent throughout the extent of the season. A lot of close calls, specifically in the tail end of the season in November against teams like LSU and Arkansas. And not a lot of people, including me, an alumni of the school, was expecting the big win over Georgia that they had in the SEC championship. Talk to us a little bit about, what do you think the keys to success are for Alabama in this game? And what do you think they're going to try to focus on specifically to stop Desmond Ridder and the Cincinnati offense?
This game is hard for me to, because, I do my team talent formula. You can find it on sportscast.net. It's just kind of hard on a very personal level, and how fundamentally I believe talent matters, and how when you got the Jimmy and the Joes on one side, how it's just extremely difficult, no matter how great the coach is, no matter how experienced the roster is, no matter how good a team that Cincinnati has. I just have a hard time seeing the worst roster from a baseline perspective that has ever made the CFP, a team that they only played 3 other teams in the whole season with top 50 talent, according to the 247 team talent composite. I'm just having a hard time seeing Cincinnati really to be able to match up with Alabama. And I know Alabama wasn't consistent, and a lot of that had to do with youth. I think it was one of the younger Alabama rosters. They had a lot of youth starting on the offensive line, so they had some offensive line issues early in the season. I also think the wide receiver position was pretty young. You had guys like Menchie and Jamison Williams are more experienced, but you're pretty young other than that, pretty young at the tailback position. But as you saw, that talent really came together against against Georgia. and they were able to really dominate that game. I don't think it was the best game by Georgia. I think you'd see a much more competitive game in the national title. Spoiler alert, that is my national title. But I cannot possibly see how Cincinnati can match up on the offense, defensive line. I cannot see how they're going to match up with the athletes on the outside. So for Alabama, you just go out and play your game. You mix it up. I mean, maybe not exactly, definitely the same game plan as Georgia. There was definitely a very creative play calling by Bill O'Brien, and Bryce Young just played out of his mind in that game. He doesn't even have to play out of his mind against Cincinnati. Bill O'Brien doesn't even have to have an overtly creative game plan. They just need to line up, and I don't think Cincinnati can match up. If this game is within 3 touchdowns, I will be very, very surprised. I just can't possibly see this roster that Cincinnati has and then who they play against matching up against Alabama. I mean, I think Alabama has played 5 or 6 other teams that would beat Cincinnati on a pretty consistent basis. I think this really is I hate to be nihilistic about Cincinnati, but I think this is the worst team to ever make the college football playoff. I just do. So the answer to that question is Alabama just needs to go out and just play their game, and I think they win by 3 to 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, all really great points. And just to play a little bit of devil's advocate here from the Cincinnati side of things, they are tied for the best record in terms of win-losses with Alabama in all of college football over the last 2 years. They played really, really well against Georgia in their bowl game last year. Obviously, bowl games, much different scenario than a playoff game where you have so much more to play for. Byron, passing it over to you, I'm curious to see what you think. What is it that Cincinnati does that makes them successful, both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball? And what are your thoughts on Desmond Ridder as a quarterback? Is he legit? Do you think he has an NFL future? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Me, being a guy that played like in a small school, Tulsa, where I went, and when we did play, the bigger schools, the OUs, we played the Oklahoma States, you do get up for the big schools. For them, that's what it's going to be the same thing for. They're going to get up because it's the big bad OU, not OU, but Alabama, and they're going to show the world, that they belong, on the field. As far as, Ridder, I think he's going to be the X factor, as far as the quarterbacks that Alabama has had problems with that could run a bit. That might be an issue. They have had in the past, issues with Manziel back in the day, Deshaun Watson, and the guys they played, they could run a little bit. They don't have to be, world-class sprinter, but just enough to keep them honest when you have those guys, screaming off the edge. I think personally that they're going to match up. They're going to match up. They're going to do their thing. I don't be surprised. Go Cincinnati Bearcats.
Love that. Chris, I want to hear your thoughts on the Heisman Trophy winner, Bryce Young. What is it that he does that makes him so successful? Obviously he's a very talented kid and he's mastered Alabama's offense really quickly here. Keep in mind, he's a first-year starter, which I really think drives home the point of just how great of a season he's had. But in your opinion, what sets him apart from the rest? And, what are you most excited about seeing from his game on Friday afternoon?
Like you mentioned, this is a first-year starter, and he becomes the first Alabama quarterback to win the Heisman. That's just phenomenal in its own right. No mistakes. Only 4 interceptions this year, and he gets the ball to where it needs to go. I think that losing Mechie is that's obviously a huge blow to any team other than Alabama. In steps Ohio State transfer and Jameson Williams. It's just also a phenomenal wide receiver for him to throw to. So I think against Georgia, he was just at his best and proved he was the worthy recipient of the trophy this year. And I think he, like Ty said, he doesn't have to play out of his mind for Alabama to roll in this game. I think he's going to do just that, just manage the game, not make any mistakes like he's done all year, and he's going to have that offense humming.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Ty, I wanted to hear your thoughts specifically on 2 players on Cincinnati's secondary, one being Sauce Gardner, who I've seen in a lot of projections as a first-round NFL draft pick at corner, as well as Kobe Bryant. spelled differently than obviously the NBA player. I know he's going to be wearing the number 8 jersey for this game as well. But just talk a little bit about those players and where you project them to go in the NFL draft and really how talented they are and how they can scheme up against, Jamison Williams and some of the deep wide receiver room that Alabama has.
So I'm going to be honest, Cincinnati's roster is probably the one that I know the least of any of these teams, just because I usually follow the Power 5 schools, the team in the top 25. Now, those two guys are very good players. And in general, Luke Fickell, his ability to develop, I know I kind of did a diss session on the whole talent on Cincinnati's roster, but Luke Fickell is one of the best coaches in college football. And his ability to develop players on either side of the ball, but especially on the defensive side of the ball, has been great since he's been there. He obviously had Marcus Freeman, who I believe was the best defensive coordinator. He's now the head coach of Notre Dame, so he was just tremendous in like recruiting guys and developing them up. And I think Gardner and Bryant will both be early round draft picks. There would be guys that obviously did not come out of high school as extremely highly rated guys, but through great development and a great program that Luke Fickell has developed at Cincinnati, they will be early round draft picks, and they will have the ability to, I think, match up with some of the Alabama wide receivers. I think where I see more of the issue is, that's why I said Young doesn't have to play out of his mind, because obviously Menchie just got hurt. I don't think the wide receiver group is definitely as good this year for Alabama. You don't have the Judys. I'm forgetting the guy that ended up getting kicked out of the NFL for killing someone. What's his name?
Ruggs.
Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle. I mean, these are some of the best receivers to come out the last decade. These are all first-round guys. I think Williams is obviously good. Bolden's a solid slot receiver. I think Early he's definitely going to be a good player, but he's a freshman. Billingsley's a solid tight end. But I think that the guys like Gardner and Bryant, I think that their matchup fairly decent. So that's why I think Alabama just needs to be themselves and do what really Nick Saban at heart wants to do, and just smash it down their throat. And just use Robinson and just use that big offensive line to kind of impose its will, because I do think the secondary of Cincinnati is pretty good, and I don't think they're as strong at the wide receiver position as they have been in recent years. So therefore, Alabama can go back to the Nick Saban way. If you know Nick Saban, you remember his early years, his first 3-4 national titles, he would just sit there all day and run right down your throat. And so I don't think you'd mind that. But you still got Bryce Young. He's the best quarterback in college football. So you're going to definitely do both. You're going to mix it up. But I do think those two guys and the Cincinnati secondary is pretty good. So if they can make some plays, that would be the game changer. If they can create some turnovers, guys like that making a couple picks in the back end, returning one for a touchdown, that's what would make it a game, is Alabama making mistakes. That's why I foresee Alabama kind of just leaning on its run game and utilizing the pass game when necessary.
Yeah, Ty, I couldn't agree more. I think a game plan that Alabama could look at that they could utilize in this game, particularly around the season, was against Ole Miss, where they just fed the ball to Brian Robinson. I think he had 4 touchdowns in that game. Bryce had a pretty good day, maybe 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, but it was really leaning on that offensive line, leaning on Brian Robinson, and something that I think is going to be a big key for this game that would have been a problem for Alabama if they were playing Cincinnati, a week after the Georgia game, is Brian Robinson's health. I know he was dealing with a hamstring injury, an ankle injury coming out of the Auburn game, and was used lightly against Georgia, although he did have a pretty good game in that one. Byron, I'm curious to learn a little bit about Cincinnati's mentality in the locker room. Obviously a lot of people doubting this team in terms of, matching up against Alabama, and really, what do you think their mentality is as a player coming from a G5 school? Do they think that they can give themselves a chance by just going out and playing their game, or is there something schematically that they're going to have to do in order to take advantage of this opportunity?
Probably, a combination of both, where, the coaches are going to put them, in a good position, to succeed, do well. But, now it's on them. Now they're going to be the ones that are lined up, see those white uniforms of red or whatever they're wearing that day. And the big bad Alabama, they're going to see that, that These guys are just like them, put their pants on the same way, do the same thing that they, go to practice, have been out there sweating, since August and, the summer and everything. So they're going to line up and they're going to smack him in the mouth, and we'll see. They're going to shock the world. That's all I got to keep saying.
I love it. I love Byron's faith in Cincinnati. Before moving on, last thing I wanted to talk about in this game and going over to you, Chris, obviously Josh Jobe, Alabama's starting corner, is going to be out for the remainder of the season out of this game. What do you think Cincinnati's game plan is going to be? Is it what they've done all season, lean on Jerome Ford, an Alabama transfer, by the way, and kind of like Byron said, smack them in the mouth from the offensive defensive line? Or are they going to try to air it out? Are they going to try to spread Alabama out, go quick, utilize Desmond Ridder's legs? What would you do, if you're Luke Fickell and the Cincinnati offense?
Well, I think that Ridder is going to have to do some things with his legs if they want to stay in this game. But you took the words right out of my mouth. Ford, he was a guy that was on Alabama's roster, so he knows these guys better than anyone else on Cincinnati. So I think in the games in the playoff where Alabama has played a massive underdog and kind of just overwhelmed them early on, Michigan State, Washington, those teams couldn't run the ball against Alabama and just kind of made it stifling. Ford has to get some yards in this game if Cincinnati is going to be successful and stay in it. I think the first quarter is massively important for this offense too. They can't go down big early on, and like I said, I think Ridder and Ford getting it done on the ground is going to be their key to success and not falling behind early.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. But going into that, Alabama has a really stout run defense. They have a really great front seven with really athletic guys. So I'm interested to see if that's, what they try to do in the first couple series, and then, you go from there. But changing gears here a little bit, let's move on to the second playoff game that we have in Miami Gardens, Miami, Florida. That is the Georgia Bulldogs versus the Michigan Wolverines. Want to throw this over to you, Ty, as the Big Ten guy here on the Sportscast. Give me your initial thoughts on this game. I know I, for one, think that this is one of the best matchups we've had in the college football playoff era, in my opinion. Just stylistically, these teams remind me so much of each other. So would love to kind of hear your initial thoughts on this game.
This game to me it could go a couple different directions. The problem I see for Michigan is I believe these teams, like you said, are kind of stylistically, you said they're similar, correct? Yeah. And I see them, I agree with you. They love to play physical, fast on defense. They like to play physical on offense. Well, I'm going to break down the talent numbers in a little bit. Georgia just has better guys. And anytime two teams are almost exactly similar in the style of play they do, the team that just has the better guys is going to win that game and could actually win the game by a significant margin. That is one direction I could go. I could see them going out, they both smack each other in the mouth, and Georgia's just better, and they end up winning the game something like I don't think it's going to be that high scoring, but 31-14 or something like that. I do like Josh Gaddis. I think he's a very good offensive coordinator. I think he's a creative guy. I think he has the ability. I mean, when he first got there to Michigan, I thought he tried to be too creative, and I thought it was kind of counterproductive. But he kind of went back, leaned on the run game, and he utilized his athletes in different ways. And that part of Josh Gaddis as an offensive coordinator makes me kind of trust that he's going to do something different with Michigan, understanding that the athletes maybe aren't quite as good matching up. Get a guy like Blake Corum, who's a dynamic guy out in space. Utilize the inside run game while also being able to go outside. Utilize a guy like J.J. McCarthy, who comes in as kind of a flex quarterback, but a guy who's a very good athlete. Get him out in space. Maybe kind of try to utilize some – they don't really have very many mismatches, but try to utilize the really good talent he has in the roster in an effective fashion. And I do trust Josh Gaddis, who's the offensive coordinator of the year in college football. If he's able to do that, and they're also able to force some turnovers, one thing that always worries me about a Kirby Smart team since he's been there is they're kind of stale on offense. They could sometimes just kind of bog down and just rely on, hey, we have 35 stars, you have 0. let's have fun. And then and that is not affected when he does play better guys. And there is good. I mean, there's some great players on the Michigan team. Aiden Hutchinson's the best defensive player in college football. Will Anderson might have an argument, but other than Will Anderson, Aiden Hutchinson's probably the first pick in the draft. So there is some really good players that I think could be able to make some plays on Georgia. And if Georgia just sits there and tries to bog down, that could end up backfiring on them. So this is an interesting game because I think, as you say, they play like each other. It could be just like dynamo watching each other like smash each other back and forth, but it could also be where Georgia just is playing better. They force some mistakes and they end up rolling by about 3 touchdowns. It's an interesting game. I do think Georgia wins, but I am definitely looking more forward to this matchup than the other one.
Yeah, all really, really great points. And Byron, specifically, I want to pass this over to you from Georgia's perspective. So 12-0 regular season, the best defense in the country, best defense in potentially college football history that was thrown around multiple times throughout this season. They go into the SEC championship game. They're favored against Alabama. Obviously, Kirby Smart has never beaten Alabama, and they get dominated, just flat out dominated. Now, you've had some time for that to settle. And what are your thoughts on how Georgia is going to try to attack this game? What are your thoughts on Stetson Bennett? From all indications, it seems that he's going to be starting this game as well. And do you think that, they have a chance to win this game?
Oof. Mr. Bennett, he's more of like the typical game manager. That's what he is. He plays within a certain frame. Doesn't turn the ball over a lot. Just does his thing. Runs occasionally when he has to, and as long as he doesn't screw up or he gets tight. From the last fiasco when they played Alabama, they should be fine. As far as the defensive line got with Georgia, they probably have a lot to prove. That when they got blasted by Alabama, the way they did, and they have to probably redeem themselves, as far as with the historic numbers of whatever they are throwing around at the time, as far as like giving up 7 points a game and all the things they were doing, all the shutouts and everything, and then all of a sudden, they got it put on them by Alabama, and now it's like we can't have it happen again. All the great things we did this year, we need to redeem ourselves in this game.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, especially because, and going back to some of the things that Ty said as well, is that Alabama attacked Georgia's secondary, something we haven't seen all season long. And they're talented, but young and unproven. And obviously covering a guy like Jamison Williams, that's proven to be really difficult for them. Chris, want to go throw it over to you in the sense of talking about some of the weapons in this game. From a skill position perspective, both on the Michigan and on the Georgia side of things, particularly, there isn't anyone that really stands out to me outside of maybe Brock Bowers, the tight end from Georgia, as someone that could really be a difference maker in this game. I'm curious to kind of hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say that Bowers is a matchup nightmare for just about any team. And I don't know if you guys saw that Michigan might be without Daxton Mills, one of their really good. Yeah, really good DB. He might have COVID. He's rumored to not even be down there with the team. Not having him in the game is going to make that matchup against Bowers even more challenging for Michigan. Outside of that, George Pickens coming back for Georgia. I thought that was an excellent sign for that offense. I still don't know why they've decided to stick with Bennett at quarterback. I thought the chemistry that JT Daniels had with Pickens at the end of last year when they won out was fantastic. So for Georgia to stick with Bennett at quarterback, I think that this is going to have to be more of a game manager. He seems to lock in on Bowers a lot, which is fine for the most part because he's such a dynamic weapon for them. But on the Michigan side, they got 2 excellent running backs. Unfortunately, that plays right into Georgia's strength. The second best rushing offense in the country against the second best rushing defense. And like Ty said, these are evenly matched teams, but Georgia's got the better roster right now. And I think that's gonna work in their favor. As long as Bennett doesn't do anything catastrophic like he did against Alabama, I think Georgia can pull this out in a very close game. This is the best semifinal matchup in the college football playoff era, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've read so much about all the hate that Stetson Bennett has taken since the SEC championship game. And granted, he did throw those 2 interceptions, one of them being a pick six. But think about before that and how he's played throughout the season. I think he averaged like 10 yards per attempt, which is a really, really good stat. The guy's a walk-on, and he does a really good job with his legs, extending plays and extending drives on third down. I think they need to go back to that. Another thing, too, that Georgia did in the Alabama game specifically was I think they gave up on the run a little bit too early, even though they started when they started falling behind. And take advantage of Zamir White, take advantage of James Cook, and really, push on that offensive line that's done so well for you throughout the season. And I think that's a great way for them to have success. Ty, I'm curious to learn from Michigan's standpoint. You mentioned Josh Gaddis, Chris mentioned some of the running backs. Talk about the quarterback, McNamara. What have you seen from him throughout the season? And how do you think he's going to play in this game?
I mean, my thoughts on McNamara is he's very much kind of a game manager. He's an efficient quarterback. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. I think that's why he starts over J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy, who was a 5-star guy, I think one of the more dynamic quarterbacks to come out last recruiting cycle, I think is a guy that's really going to be the long-term quarterback for Michigan. And I think you will see J.J. McCarthy, who's a terrific athlete, play against Georgia. But I think McNamara, he's solid. He's efficient. He's not going to do anything spectacular, but he's not going to make much mistakes. And I think that's actually why he kept the job over McCarthy, because I think McCarthy's young, probably made some mistakes and just doesn't know the game quite as good. So I think he's an efficient quarterback, but I don't think so. When you're comparing Bryce Young to Stetson Bennett, it's like comparing a future top 5 pick to a guy that's probably going to be at best an undrafted free agent. When you're comparing Cade McNamara to Stetson Bennett, I think McNamara is a guy that's probably a drafted free agent too. I think the guy who gets drafted is going to be J.J. McCarthy, and he's not probably going to play other than in kind of a utility role. So I think he's an efficient quarterback. I think he's solid, but I do not think he's the guy that's going to win Michigan the game. If Michigan wins this game, it's because they force some turnovers. I think some of the dynamic running backs like Corum makes some big time plays. And I think Stetson Bennett plays a crappy game. I think that's why. And I know that, to touch on just quickly the whole Stetson Bennett starting, JT Daniels was a highly rated recruit, and he was one of the highest rated recruits coming out. But I saw him at USC. I follow the Pac-12. I saw him even play at Georgia. I just don't think he's that great. So obviously that's why Bennett's better. I know he had a couple good games, but for the most part, I think he's just been a pretty marginal quarterback at the collegiate level. I think he's very overrated because of his high school recruiting ranking. So that's my thoughts on that. Sorry, I just thought I'd delve into that issue a little bit, because there's a lot of hand wringing. Oh, Bennett's starting, and they're not going to play JT Daniels. I'm like, I never thought he was that great.
I agree with you, and I think Kirby's even gone almost as far to basically say that Bennett just flat out beat him out. Beat him out in competition, whether it was at practice or in fall camp. And obviously, JT's had his struggles with injuries and things like that. But I agree with you. He was just flat out better than him, and that's why he's not out on the field. And I know, there's always been the Bulldog fans that say Kirby has struggled mightily with the quarterback position in terms of talent evaluation, whether that be going back to Jake Fromm and Eason and Justin Fields and all those guys. But Byron, I'm curious to hear your opinion on this. Michigan beats Ohio State. They finally get Jim Harbaugh finally gets a win over the arch rival there. Nobody really expected Michigan at the beginning of the season to challenge for a Big Ten title, much less make the playoff. What do you think the mentality is in that locker room right now? Is it, we're just happy to be here, or is it we feel like we can win this thing, the whole thing?
I think they can win it all. Yeah, I'm sure that's the way they're thinking. They got the big guy, Hutchinson. He's probably, he didn't put him on his big back and everything. He's like, you know what, we can do this. He just seems like that kind of guy that everybody looks up to, and he's been there, the Michigan way, been doing it the Michigan way, and I think that this is their year that they're going to do it.
Really?
Love that. Yeah. So want to change gears again here, guys, just a little bit, and want to pass it over to Chris. Talk about some players that you're most excited to see in these two games, whether that be matchups, offensive, defensive, some of your favorite players that you've watched throughout the season. I know we've touched on some guys a little bit here and there, but just maybe pick a few guys that you want to maybe deep dive into and maybe talk about, their NFL future and that type of thing.
Yeah, we talked about Hutchinson and his potential impact on the game for Michigan's defense. I do think he's the best defensive player in the country, and probably one or two in as far as the draft picks. And I think he could have a huge impact on this game. If he gets to Bennett, forces one of those turnovers that we could change this thing. That's how Michigan could find a path to victory. Some of the other players out of the four teams, Bowers, I talked about him earlier. That was a recruit that I really wanted to see stay on the West Coast. He's a phenomenal athlete, just lines up all over the field. Georgia has two other really good blocking tight ends, so they don't need him to stay in close to where the QB is in order to be on the field. And I think that presents a lot of challenges for Michigan's defense, knowing where Bowers is at all times. And then some of the other obvious ones on Alabama's offense, those guys are all phenomenal. I would like to see a lot out of Alabama's running game. I think that you mentioned the starters banged up, so the backup, his name escapes me. He's from right down the road in Port St. Joe. This may be his time to shine. He's finally going to get some carries. And
is that Ty Sanders you're talking about, Chris?
Yeah.
So from IMG.
Yep. And those are some of the players that I'm going to keep an eye on for sure.
Love that. Ty, to you as well. Same question. Based on your talent evaluation and some of what you've seen throughout the season, who are some guys that you're really excited to see in these two games?
Well, from Alabama and Georgia, you got almost half the 5 stars in the country that play for those two teams. So it's kind of pick your poison. I actually think the best defensive player in college football is Will Anderson. I think he's just unparalleled in his measurables. He's long, he's fast, he has a motor. I think he's one of the best edge guys to come out in the last decade. He'll be the first pick. I should never say that because it could be Bryce Young, but he'll be the first or second pick in next year's draft. I think he's just a phenomenal player. I love Bryce Young. If you go back and check, I did a podcast with Justin Riley back in the day. I believe that Bryce Young was going to start as freshman. I thought he was going to start last year. Mac Jones started the Heisman Trophy finalist and ended up being a top 15 pick, and he's now starting for the Patriots. But I think Bryce Young is one of the best quarterbacks to come out in the last decade. Just a phenomenal player out of Mater Dei High School in California. For Georgia, Jordan Davis obviously is a freak, just a monster. Nakobe Dean's one of the best linebackers in college football. Brock Bowers, like has been mentioned. I think Darnell Washington was also a former 5-star, also a very good tight end. George Pickens, one of the better wide receivers when he's healthy. I like Burton. He's a great slot guy out of California. Another guy that left the West Coast. What's the left coast? When it comes to Michigan, Aiden Hutchinson, if it's not Will Anderson, Aiden Hutchinson's the best defensive player. I love Blake Corum. I think he's a dynamic guy, a guy that when he touches the ball, he makes things happen. Doesn't even touch it that much. He's been battling an ankle injury, but I think he really is just a dynamic guy who can make plays in space. So sorry to hear about Dax Hill. I think he's a tremendous talent, a former 5-star. I hope he plays, but if he's out for COVID, that seems kind of difficult. For Cincinnati, really, it's a secondary guy. Sauce and Bryant and just how the secondary is played. I think if anything is to be of that game, it's those guys making some plays. And Alabama getting greedy, and those guys are future day 1, day 2 picks in the draft. So I think they could make some plays.
Yeah, and Byron, same question to you. Any guys? I know we've mentioned quite a few here that you're excited to see this, I guess on Friday. and talk about some of those guys and how they're going to perform.
I want to see Neil, play up to his potential, not do what he's been doing. 6'7", 360, laying on people. I want to see him block somebody for a turn to change.
Guy's a freak. He's insane.
He's big. I don't think he's a top 5 pick, but that's my own, top 5. That's my own opinion, because most of the Alabama linemen don't do well. Some do. It's a lot have, but it's a lot that fail too. So it's kind of 50-50, with that. Who else? Dean, the linebacker, like he talked about for Georgia. We'll see him. Ritter, Ritter. Yeah. See how he's going to play against all these 5-star guys on the Alabama team. Both the corners for Cincinnati, and the big guy in the middle for Georgia, Davis. I want to see how he does. He's going to hold up. And watch out for Sanders, the nose tackle for Cincinnati as well. They're the leading sacker.
Love that. Couple of guys I'm excited to watch this on Friday. I keep wanting to say this weekend. It's weird that it's a Friday kickoff. One being Kool-Aid McKinstry, starting corner for Alabama, true freshman, 5-star, has started about 3 or 4 games now. I think this is going to be his breakout game. I think he's going to have an interception at least in this game and play really, really well. Ja'Cory Brooks, wide receiver for Alabama, caught the game-tying touchdown against Auburn, and I think he's going to fill that spot for Menchie really well, especially some of those underneath routes so that Jameson can kind of really blow the top off. That's what I'd like to see. And then a guy on Cincinnati, let's see, Alec Pierce, I think is his name, the wide receiver, number 12, really good playmaker. I know they use him in a bunch of different formations, so excited to see that. Want to move on here to predictions, starting with Alabama and Cincinnati. I believe the line is 13.5 favoring Alabama with an over 57.5. Starting with you, Chris, would love to hear your score prediction and why.
Sure. Like we've said, the talent disparity is pretty stark in this game. I do think that Cincinnati will have a good showing early on, but Alabama just overwhelms them over the course of the game. Give me 37-20 Bama.
Love that. Ty?
Chris kind of, he kind of my predictions, literally almost. I kind of think the same thing. I think Cincinnati comes out really inspired. I think maybe Alabama's a little flat, but eventually they kind of wear them down 38-21.
And Byron?
I'm going with the little guy, Cincinnati.
Really? Okay.
Yes, I am. I'm going with the little guy, Cincinnati. Alabama's going to get tight, third quarter, fourth quarter. Cincinnati, 35-27.
Wow.
Love it. I do think that this game is going to be very conservative in the beginning. A lot of feel you out, especially on offense. I think it's going to be a low-scoring first half, and then Alabama runs away with it late. Give me Alabama 41, Cincinnati 24. And moving on to Georgia and Michigan, starting with you, Chris, would love to hear your score prediction on the late night game and why.
Oh, man, I think this one's going to have us on the edge of the couch all game. This is going to be a phenomenal game of two pretty, like they look across the field and they see one another. But Georgia, Stetson Bennett plays a steady game, and they win 28-24.
Love it. Sorry, I should have said this earlier. The spread is 7.5 favoring Georgia at the moment, and an over/under of 44.5, which is that's a low total point score. It's more like an NFL score from the early 2000s. Ty, let's hear your prediction.
So this one, I want Michigan to win the national title of these 4 teams because I'm a Big Ten guy. But I just don't think this is a good matchup for them. I just think that it's 2 teams that kind of mirror each other, and I just think Georgia has better guys. When I'm looking at the numbers, they do have better guys. And I just think that Michigan's going to fail to run the ball as effectively as they normally do. I don't think they have a bunch of dynamic playmakers outside, and I don't think McNamara is a big-time quarterback. And I think Georgia's able to kind of grind them enough because I think they keep on stopping them on defense and then eventually wears it out when you keep on 3 and out, 6 and out, and your defense is on the field too much. I actually have it being 42-21.
And high scoring.
Wow. Yikes.
That is a big one. Byron, let's hear your prediction for the Michigan-Georgia game.
Michigan and the 2-headed monster. The running game, their tight ends are going to be big in this game. I'm going to go with Go Blue, Michigan, 24-17, low score.
I love it. Byron going against the chalk. I love it. I love it. I love all your points, particularly from the Georgia perspective that we were talking about earlier. Ty, I do agree with you. I think that because they're so stylistically similar, I just think Georgia overall is just better at doing what they both do well, both on the defensive and offensive side of the ball. Give me Georgia 35, Michigan 17. So that's going to do it for pretty much everything that we wanted to cover here tonight, guys. Really appreciate you guys joining us. In terms of our audience, you can follow us on Twitter at the Sportscast1 and visit us on our website, thesportscast.net. Make sure to check out our show schedule throughout the rest of the week. I'm sure after these games on Friday, we are going to have another show talking about the national title game. And also you can reach our panelists here on Twitter and some of the on Instagram and Facebook as well. But other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. Very happy New Year.